Welcome to On the Journey, stories for leaders and aspiring leaders. This is your host, Leo Rodriguez. I'm very excited about bringing you a little preview of what this podcast is all about. Behind it, there is a very simple idea, and it is to give you an honest, inside view into the experiences of leaders who are in the trenches, that are executing and deploying high levels of leadership today, just like you and me. On the Journey is a platform for them to share and for you to learn how they are traversing that journey. And I want to do this by exploring specifically their transition points, whether they were an account executive or an individual contributor and they moved into a leadership role for the first time, or as they progressed into higher levels of leadership in their careers. Through honest, no-holds-barred conversation, I will explore their motivations, their preparation, their mindset, who their mentors were, frameworks, mistakes, thoughts, and advice, so you can put them into action on your own journey. If you're a leader or an aspiring leader, you'll have a first row seat to my guest experience, almost like if you can join me and together we can pick the brains. So are you ready? Let's go. Welcome to On the Journey. Enjoy. Hey, welcome to Season 1, Episode 4 of On the Journey, Stories for Leaders and Aspiring Leaders. This is Leo Rodriguez, your host. And today I have a very special episode, like every other episode, but this is a little bit extra because I have a guest that I absolutely adore. I enjoy tremendously working with her. It's one of those leaders that actually you feel energized every time you meet with her. Her name is Julie Cecilio. Julie is a VP of Go-to-Market Enablement at Calibra. She worked for VMware, Cisco, Sun Microsystem, and a few other companies. Has a long, outstanding career in leadership. She'll hate me for saying that, but Julie, it's amazing. I met her at Calibra. She ran my go-to-market enablement, and she's an absolute dynamo. She works extremely hard, and she attracts tremendous talent, and is a great leader. So in this podcast, we really connect with Julie. We talk about a lot of things. I love when Julie talks about, as a leader, one of the things that she tries to avoid is not to solve all problems with your own solutions. And she tries to bring the experiences of all her people and not to try to replicate yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to be capitalizing, and that's the word that she used, capitalizing on their talents and their experience. And that there is a time when you need to make a decision and move, but she tries to give more direction. She also tries to ask a lot of questions and actually listen to the answers. It's funny that she says a lot of leaders ask questions but don't listen to what the answers are. And she says, ask the answers. Otherwise, why do you ask questions? And try to find out what is behind the answers. We also have a little bit of a riff and conversation about how to show up for different people. It's not the same for people that are super experienced or people that are new in the post or in the job, and how she manages that. And the one thing that I like, and I think you're going to get a lot of value out, is what are the things that she focuses on consistently. And she mentions 3 particularly. And lastly, Julie talks about, getting it done. It's all about getting it done and not just beating around the bushes. So I really enjoy talking to Julie. I'm enormously thankful for her time in this podcast. All of this and a lot more in this wide-ranging conversation with Julie Cecilio. Enjoy. Julie, welcome to On the Journey. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, great. Well, it's a great pleasure to have you here. When you accepted, I was extremely excited. And I wanted I couldn't wait to dive into the topics today. But before we do that, I'll try to do it for the audience and for you too, what this podcast idea is.
Yep.
And the idea is just to have a contribution to aspiring leaders, particularly, but also leaders that want to get to the next level. And I don't want to interview people that already have a platform, that big CEOs and CROs. I want to talk to people like you and me, right, that are in the trenches, that are deploying probably the same level quality of leadership, but maybe don't have a platform. And are maybe more relatable to the audience. So that's the idea, and share your multiple successes and some of the some of the pitfalls, along the way. But it is truly a pleasure to be talking to you. And I'm gonna start saying that when I met you at Calibra, it was, to me, it was instant partnership, right? I felt a connection, and it does help that I'm a big proponent for enablement and a
Yes,
big champion for
that did
enablement. But
help.
it has all to do with you just being a great partner. You have a strong bias for action,
Hmm.
and definitely know what you're doing, right? So
Yep.
um, thanks for being here today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me. I was excited to get the invite, and I'm glad you're doing this too because you have a great reputation for building teams and showing people the way. And I think this is a great application for you to share that with lots of other people. So hopefully this
Yeah,
continues as a program for lots of people to work with you.
hopefully, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So you've had a long trajectory, and most of it,
That's
like
that's a way of
Cisco
saying
and
you're old,
VMware.
Julie. Tell us.
No, Julian, I was surprised. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile a little bit more detail today, saying, "Gosh, she doesn't have this many years. How did she do this?" But I know how you did it, because you've so focused and developed. But one of the ideas of the podcast is just to focus on the transition points, and I want to go back to when you first became a leader, and ask you why. What drove you to
Yeah.
get into leadership, right? Was
Yep.
a tap on the shoulder? Was something that you seek out actively? And just walk me through that.
Yep. So I have a very good story about my first manager job, but I was always
Cool.
on
Let's hear it.
teams. I grew up playing, yeah, I grew up playing on teams, sports teams of
Yeah.
all kinds.
Mm,
And
right.
soccer was the one that I focused on the most, and I played through college.
Yeah.
And but I was in choir or other group activities, right? And I always was part of the people who were leading the organization in one way, shape, or another. And I just like that. I like that position. Although I was never a team captain, which I'm not bitter about at all. But anyway, so when I got my first job out of college, I was actually in retail. I worked at Macy's.
Yeah.
I ran a department, electronics, if you can believe that. It was back when they sold
Oh.
TVs and Walkmans
Hmm.
and all that. And I didn't have a problem organizing people, telling them what to do, right? That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was figuring out how to motivate them.
Right.
And the very first person that I had to let go, he was a super nice man, but he couldn't get to work on time, which is a basic thing in retail. Like you have a shift and you have to show up, right? These are
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
basics. Like you got to do the
Yeah.
basics. And so I took him back in the stock room and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but I have to let you go." And I started crying. I cried. And he ended up consoling me because I felt so bad because I felt like I'd failed him, right? I couldn't get
Right.
and the
Right.
reality was
Right.
he had all kinds of other stuff going on in his life and there were, but that was really where I realized leadership wasn't just about giving structure and direction. It was about connecting and understanding the context of
Right.
people. And then as I went through my journey, you just learn more about different people need different kinds of things to be successful. But that was my first manager job, and I cried when I had to lay somebody off.
No, and look, it's very kind of relatable. I
Mm,
think I think we all struggle with our first,
yeah,
performance evaluation or
yeah,
performance firing. But I want to pull a thread about motivation. And
mm,
I work with a coach. It was a sports coach, actually,
yep,
and then became a business coach. He said, talent times emotion equals performance, right?
mm-hmm,
And the analogy that he does is that your talent tends to be, or skill, or however you want
mm-hmm,
to call it, tends to be kind of
mm-hmm,
evolve slowly, right? You don't wake up one morning and you're 100% more talented than the morning before.
right,
But emotion runs the gamut,
yeah,
like minute by minute,
yep, yep,
right? You and I know that.
yep.
And definitely when you're on a low, you want to give your 50%, maybe 60%. But when you're on a high, you can give 110%.
That's right.
So the work that you and I do has to do with managing people's emotion or leading through emotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Emotional states,
Yep.
etc. Mindset. But I love the story of your first time as a leader. And was there was your background in sports that pushed you into leadership, or was something that you really desired to do, or how that came about?
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt comfortable in leadership roles. It's a certain type of pressure
Right. Right.
that I think some people like and some people don't. And I've throughout my career, I've gone back and forth between individual contributor roles and leading teams.
Yeah.
And I also think that's a really good thing to do as well because you get that perspective. And every time I've been an individual contributor, it was a conscious decision on my part, and I
Right.
missed leading the team. But
Mm-hmm.
your focus is very different, right? What you're spending your days doing is very different, and your successes are different than when you're leading a team. The successes are about the team and the contribution the team is making to the business objectives, but it's also about seeing an individual grow and achieve something they never thought they could do, or grow their career, so that sets them up for other things in their personal lives that they are able to do that maybe they thought they wouldn't ever be able to do. There's those things that aren't really about the job, let's just say it that way, right? It's about helping individuals develop and have lots of opportunities in their lives.
Yeah, I think that's the to me when you become a leader, that's sort of the fulfillment, right?
Hmm.
So seeing people grow and develop. You mentioned something that is interesting, and I see a lot of leaders, or particularly new leaders, kind of trip and fail at the beginning. Is your day to day when you're an individual contributor versus a leader are very different,
Yes.
right? And I think you and I know that a lot of people in their minds when they are not leaders or they are thinking about transitional leaders is simple, like I'll do more of what I do, I'll
Exactly.
get people doing exactly the way I do it,
Yep.
I just need to get them doing, I just multiply myself,
Right.
right? So can you describe for fellow audience members
Hmm.
that want to get into leadership and have that mental image,
Yep.
what's the difference? Like what do you do day to day today as a leader or leader of leaders that as an individual contributor you don't,
Right.
right? I have some ideas, but I want to hear you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that's really different is trying not to solve all the problems with your own solutions. When you're an individual contributor, right, you have a problem, a task, a project, whatever, an objective you're trying to solve for, and you put a plan together and you deliver it. But when you have other people around you on your team, part of the reason we hire other people on the team is because they're going to solve things differently. They're going to bring different experiences, different skills, different perspectives, mindsets. And so if I'm just replicating a whole bunch of Julies, as great as that is, right, that doesn't capitalize on the benefit of having all those different kinds of people around you, right? And so I tend to set direction, and then I try to remember to ask more questions than I do give direction.
Right.
But
Right.
sometimes I just direct and go because at some point you just have to make that decision as a leader. But other times it's more about, well, how would you solve the problem? What would you recommend? How can I help you? What do you need from me?
Right.
And I think that's an important distinction. And then be willing to listen to the answers. That's another thing too, right? Sometimes we ask the question, but then we don't maybe even ask the second question. Well, why do you need that? How is that going to help? What else can I do? And then the other thing as a leader is my job is to break down barriers for the team so they can get stuff done. One of my mentors that I had at Cisco, who now is publishes books and does all kind of stuff. She's amazing, and she runs
Right.
customer experience for Salesforce. Karen Mangia, and she was my first formal mentor when I was ever, I think. And she actually is younger than I am, but she was super successful, and I couldn't figure out how to get out of the box of, but I'm doing my job really well. Why aren't I getting
Right.
promoted? Why aren't I getting a team? Why aren't I get right? Because I'm doing my job really well. So don't I get promoted for that? Don't I get a team for that? Don't I get? She was the first person who really said, look, you got to think about a couple things. One is, what is your brand? What do you want other people to know you for? Other executives, other leaders. And the second was, who do you have in the leadership chain that you're connected to?
Mm-hmm.
So that when you do need to break down barriers, when you do need help, you've got people to go to. that can advocate for you in the room when you're not there, or you and your team, whatever, right? All of those things. And I had never really thought about the fact that it's not just about doing more activity. It's about,
Right.
right, connecting with the landscape and understanding the context, and then being able to tell that story back to your team, and then setting them up for success to deliver against it.
Well, I'll take the last 5 minutes and pay you royalties on it because you drop a few things that are fantastic. I think for new leaders and existing too. I'll pull a couple of threads, but not you said it with very clear words. Is not or trying not to solve all the problems with your own solutions. I mean, you got to solve problems, but
Right.
the solution is not going to be yours particularly. And one of the worst things you can do is just kill people initiative and creativity with directing your own solution
Yep.
versus opening the space or the road. And the other thing, and we'll talk and mentorship and advocacy has been like a big theme on
Yes.
all my guests, particularly you're the third woman. I have fourth podcast and episode, and I'm very proud of that.
Yes.
You talk about network and breaking barriers. I think one of the things that leaders sometimes it takes them a while is your team. You look down, and that's your team, the people that reports to you,
Right.
and we work on this at Colibra together. It's like your team is actually
Your
your side,
peers. Yeah.
the people, your peers that are going to help you execute,
Right.
right? That's that's your team. The people that reports to you is also your team, but it's a different
Yep.
kind of relationship, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that idea of having other people advocate for you when you're not in the room. It's such a clear
exactly.
picture for me. And not just like, oh, I know Julie can get it done, or Julie and her team can get it done. It's more about understanding the context, right? Preparing your stakeholders and sponsors to understand what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to help them be successful, like your stakeholders and
Right.
sponsors, right? If they help you, you're better able to help them, and there's all of that. But there's a lot of work. That takes a lot of work. And if I do that well, it makes the work that my team that reports to me, the work
Right.
they're doing, easier and more effective,
Hmm.
which gives them strength to continue to grow, right? And all of that. So it's a nice it's a closed loop.
Yeah. As you develop as a leader, if you can share one or two go-to frameworks that you have
Yep.
that you use and you put in place. And when I say frameworks, it's like little kind of box methods, right? When I get is how do you give feedback?
Yep.
I use the SBI method or
Hmm.
framework, or how do I manage performance? I use the wheel continuum. So what are some of those that you
Yeah.
can describe? Maybe one or two. That's fine.
So I'll just say you're way more structured than I am. So I'll just which I've known since day one that we had the opportunity to work together.
Yeah, I
Yes,
remember.
you're very structured, which is one of the things that I really makes it easy to work with you. But there's something when you were talking about talent plus emotion, right? The thing that I always look at is attitude plus effort, and that's an important thing. How you show up is as important as what you deliver. And I think coaching people through that is really important. If I have somebody who's really delivering and executing, but nobody knows about it, they don't speak in meetings, they're not comfortable being in front of the room, they don't want to, they don't want to kind of step into the space, it's going to be harder for them to grow. Or if they have a more negative attitude about the environment they're in, they're not going to see as much opportunity, right? So there's attitude plus
Yeah.
effort for me has I always look at both of those things. The second thing that I love is I used to teach a course at Santa Clara University, leadership business skills, and I only taught it as an adjunct for a couple of years, but I've carried the syllabus, I guess, with me, right? And it's based on the Leadership Challenge
Yeah.
is the name of the
Right.
book, and Jim Kouzes
Hmm.
and Barry Posner are the two.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I know those
Yeah.
guys. Yeah, I read the book. I
Yeah.
remember now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's a little thick
it's
book,
thick, yeah, and
kind of.
there's a whole
Yeah.
workbook
Yeah.
that goes with it, and you can really, people can
Yes.
take it and do it
Yes.
with their teams. But
Yeah.
the 5 tenets of that, right, are model the way. So one, expect your team to follow the way you act,
Yeah. It's
right?
not necessarily what you say. It's
It's
just
how
how
you
you
act,
act and exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the piece of inspiring a shared vision. So again,
Hmm.
I can't just tell, it has to be a collective group effort. It's something that other people can buy into and really. take hold of as their own. Challenge the process is the third thing. And
Uh-huh.
that's always like sort of having that learner mindset or that growth mindset all the time. How can we do it better,
Yep.
faster, smarter? Just because we used to do it that way doesn't mean we always have to. So I think that's really important. Enabling others to act. So really making sure you're getting that collaboration. And to your point, right, the
Mm-hmm.
team, your peers, but also
Yeah.
your own
Yeah.
individual reporting folks, and then encouraging the heart, which is kind of the emotional part of it that you were referencing. And so I use those five in a way of really kind of thinking about how I build my teams. And I try to remember to do it in an organized way, in a very structured way like you do, but I'm not as structured. I tend to do a lot of things through my gut, I guess is
More
the best way
creatively.
to say it.
More.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
more creative and through my gut.
Yeah.
But then I depend on having people around me who are more structured, and so it's a good balance, right?
Yeah, I think you're perfectly right. And if I extrapolate that when I work with you for a few months and then Mako came on board,
Hmm.
Calibra, like she's as structured as they come. At
Yes.
least that's what I got.
Yep.
And besides, like doing things different the way than you did it, it complements you really really well.
Yep.
So I think that also speaks about the ability as a leader to bring people that is not a clone of
Carbon copy.
yourself,
Yep.
but they can bring different skills, right?
Yep.
That's one of the things I personally sometimes struggle myself. Just when I hire, etc. I try to look for my traits instead of looking for their traits,
Right.
and I guess I'll be more evolution.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think that is an important thing. The third thing that I do as far as a approach is just I I got to my current position in sales enablement and go to market enablement through change management. And I spent a lot of time
okay,
building skills as a change manager. And as you
okay,
know, everything we do these days is about change. Every single thing.
yes, yeah,
And
yeah,
so really thinking about that process of right, what are the outcomes? What's the impact? Who is it impacting? And then how do you get from here to there? Right. And
right.
kind of being method. And so those, I think those are the three things that I use on a regular basis, whether I do it intuitively or I do it very directly.
Hmm.
Those are the three things that I use on a regular basis.
Well, yeah. I think any leader today that doesn't have a modicum of understanding of change management, it's very challenged because you and I know things change all the time, every month, every quarter. Take me back to a big blunder, the one of the big Julie's blunder like you made in your career. Probably, I mean, we've made more than we can count off, but anyone that comes to mind that you had to live with.
You know, it's funny. I don't have any really. I'm sorry. I don't have any really big ones. But I've
Yeah,
done things where when I was running a large program and I've put a budget together, right? And
yeah,
had to sell it and something was off. I mean, I think from a management perspective, I mean, I've hired people that weren't a good fit, right? And
right,
I think
right. Yeah.
that's a hard one to get over because it takes a lot of effort to get there and you have a lot of
And you want to make it
you
work.
want to
You want
make
to
it work.
commit to the person. You want to make it work no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yep.
And there's the performance is just around the corner,
Right,
right? It
exactly.
always seems like
Exactly. And it's like, well, if I could
I
just
totally relate.
yeah, if I could just do one more thing to help them get to that or and I think unfortunately being part of a leadership team is sometimes you have to cut the cord faster. And then it might not be about people. It might be about a program or a customer that you're pursuing or whatever, right? And being willing to be honest about what the opportunities are and then making decisions faster is probably something I work on all the time. Whether it's about hiring people or trying to keep a project alive that maybe was a good idea at one point and now just really is not, right? And doing that assessment more regularly and just making decisions to, you know what, it didn't work, let's move on. Whatever for whatever,
Yeah.
I think those are my bigger challenges on a regular basis.
Yeah, I totally relate. One of the things that I try to do when we were in Calibra and before and after is, at the end of every particular cycle, whether a month or a quarter, I she I do it myself, and I ship my leaders to say, okay, what did you learn, and which one of
Right.
those are you going to pick and improve and get better,
Yep.
right? So that's important. I'm going to change direction a little bit, but one of the things I think young leaders or early leaders, let's
Hmm.
put it, early
Hmm.
leaders struggle with is establishing credibility, and
Hmm.
this kind of mental block that you have to been there, done that to actually be credible. How do you learn or develop sort of building credibility with your team?
I mean, anytime you step into a new role with an existing team and you're trying to build credibility with them, is that what you're referring to? Is like you're trying to build credibility with your team?
Yeah.
Well, the number one thing is say what you're going to do and then do it. That to me is the number one
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
with a team is it builds credibility, even if I'm wrong, and then owning it if you're wrong. Again, back to model the way.
Hmm.
Try to understand where people are. What is their perspective? Validate that perspective, and then do what you say you're going to do. And then
Right.
if it doesn't work or you're wrong, own that with them and be transparent because then I think it creates a much more free environment where people will feel like they can challenge you. And back to our conversation at the beginning is, if you're going to hire different kinds of people and you want them to bring their diversity of thought to the table or whatever, then you have to create an open environment where they feel like, hey, I can challenge this person and still be
Right.
safe. There's a lot of conversation about emotional safety, professional safety, right? That gets talked about. There's books about them, and I
Hmm.
think that that's an
Hmm.
important component as well. Is making people comfortable with who I am and my door's always open. I think that's another thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm accessible, even if it's late or early or I'm in a meeting, and if something's important, I'll clear my plate.
You started with a very important phrases like, you know, say what you're going to do and do what you say
Hmm.
you're going to do.
Hmm.
In my orchestrated way of seeing the job is it's called behavioral integrity, right? So,
Hmm.
if you're going to follow up with something and you promise to do it, just do it. Not only on the big things, but also actually on the small things that impact individuals.
Yep.
It's absolutely critical, right? When you send people off to do stuff and you don't follow up or check in, um, thinking that they're going to get done, it's another kind of issue, right?
Yep.
So having a little book or a little kind of word file where you file your things are
It
important.
is.
Yeah.
It is. It is. And then I mean that goes for even people's personal lives. I mean, we all spend a bunch of our time at our job, but it
Of
doesn't
course.
mean we
Yeah.
leave our personal stuff at the door, right? And so
Hmm.
sometimes people need just to vent in your one-on-ones. They just need to check in. And giving people the opportunity to do that, I think, is important. It can't be all about like, did you do everything I asked you to do? Like that's a one-way
Right.
management style that has not worked for me. Right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just don't.
Yeah.
I don't
Uh,
get the best out of people, and usually, actually, if I'm that directive with somebody, it means that their performance is at risk, right? Because I'm trying to
yeah.
get them down over something, and that's not the best place to be in. I think really
Yeah.
connecting with
Yeah.
people on a personal level is important, and that's how you build the credibility.
And I think the more old school dictatorial kind of leadership styles are getting out of practice, and new generations don't react well. I can tell you because I have two of those in my home, and
Yes.
it just doesn't fly,
No.
right? You don't get you don't get the kind of follow through with that.
And that's an interesting point
Yeah.
as a side segue. There's shortly going to be 5 generations in the workforce.
Yes.
5.
Hmm.
That's insane. Like, and so we as leaders, how do you engage all those different kinds of people? They all have different
Yeah.
expectations. How do they? So I think the only way to really drive that is to understand what individual people on your team need and try to help support them in some amount. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to have personal individualized engagement models with every single person on your team, but we do have to allow for the fact that if I have somebody who's been in a career for 30 years versus somebody who's been in a career for 3, I've got to come to the table and show up a bit differently.
Well, one of the things I totally hear you is I think you described like you can't just be so personalized. You're gonna kind of burn out trying to
Right.
have different styles. I rely more on integrity in the sense that
Mhm.
you communicate the way you communicate and have a set of values that you let people know,
Mhm.
and you're true to those values. I think that does 80% of the work
Yep.
on its own.
Yep.
If you try to tell everyone a story that they like to hear, the people will see through it,
Exactly.
and you're going to come through as a kind of accommodating
Right.
to everybody, and you got to also be, as a leader, you give me your feedback, but as a leader you got to be also comfortable with the fact that your value set and your brand, it's not going to jive with everybody.
That's right. That's
I
right.
mean, some people, it's not going to like what you have to sell.
That's right. That's right.
I don't know if you agree.
Yeah.
In your job in enablement, that's your gig, but as a leader, what are the three things that you're looking at, like your job depends on it, like what are the things that you're kind of constantly looking at in the team or in your job, your metrics,
Mhm.
whatever it may
Mhm.
be, that you're consistently like really really like are the backbone
Yep.
of your work, right? That without those don't deliver performance.
So the first thing is stakeholder requirements. For
Yeah.
my
Okay.
team in particular,
You're you're very attuned to that.
yeah,
I noticed that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that, and just in the work that we do, and I would say this is probably true for anybody who's running a program or a project at a company, or if you're, if you're putting a project together to close business with a customer, right? All of those things,
Right.
you need to understand what the outcome is that stakeholder is looking for, and what is your contribution to their outcome. And then when you come back with a solution to that, get them to sign off on it.
Yeah. You do that very well too.
Yeah. And then back to the, if things aren't working, own it. I- Have some thick skin. It's okay. Things aren't always going to work. And I think that's okay. But you got to sort of throw the spaghetti at the wall sometimes and see if it sticks.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not going to stick. It's going to just be a mess, and it's like, okay, that didn't work. Let's fix it. So that having the stakeholder is really important. The other thing is understanding where the organization's trying to go. Where is the company trying to
The
go?
strategic
The
direction. Right.
strategic
Right.
direction, right? And so
Yeah.
bridging both of those things, and then I'm a big racy person. I love roles and responsibilities. I like understanding, what's my lane.
Frameworks.
Yeah,
You were telling me that I'm structured, but you love
I
racy.
do
Like
love
I
racy.
think I've seen a race.
Yes,
Yeah. So what is racy for the
racy.
audience? What is
It's a roles and responsibility framework.
exactly
And
right?
yeah, and so it's responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. And it's interesting, and I wonder if this is partly because we're so in a social media age. Like everybody feels like they get to have a voice about everything. And a lot of times you want to just say thank you for your input, but you are in this consultant informed category, right? Like I've got to get this thing out the door. So as you mentioned, I have a bias for action. So I like stuff to get it done, right? And so the
Yeah.
easiest way to do that is to understand what is your role, what is my role, what is my team's role in this particular situation, because otherwise
Hmm.
I can't set them up for success if I don't
Right.
understand what the expectation is. So yeah, roles and responsibilities to me is super super important.
And I noticed that, and again, for those that are not familiar with the RACI, you can just Google it. It's RACI Matrix, and
Hmm.
I actually started using it more after working with you
Yep.
because it wasn't like it was in my tool belt, but it wasn't like something my go-to, and
Mhm.
now like I'm writing a RACI right now for demos and
Yay!
stuff in my new job, and
Great.
and it's
Yeah.
exactly the same thing that you say. Like people, like not all the voices have the same weight
Yep.
on a particular project,
Yep.
and but as a leader, you can't just throw your hands and say, well, or create unnecessary conflict. Just people need to know, like you're going to be consulting on this, you're going to be
Yep.
informed on this, but there's no necessarily way to push the project in another direction.
Right.
So no, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think also for the team, you don't want somebody on your team working on something that they shouldn't be working on, right? Like if they're in the C or the I category, then help them understand what that means and what the expectation is
Exactly. Yeah.
versus, and that'll flow downstream to how much time they should spend on it and effort and all that stuff, right? Because we all need to spend our time on the things that we are responsible and accountable for, and less so on things that we're consulted and informed about, right? Like I might need to know about it, but it's something I'm going to read, it's bedtime reading versus like I'm going to spend all Monday morning building a whole project plan around
Right.
it or something. And I
Right.
think people, we don't have that conversation very well often. I find like everybody shows up and it looks like everybody has the same level of responsibility for something. It's like, well, that's not actually how that
Well,
works.
that's exactly where I'm doing this podcast, because I think the degradation and leadership quality, you see it, I see it in the world at the highest levels and
Hmm.
also at the small levels. So this is a contribution to try to make people, you mentioned expectations, like setting clear expectations. You
Yep.
can do 80% of your job with two or three things at the beginning, just setting
Mm.
clear expectation, a clear vision, connect with the strategy,
Yep.
repeat. I wrote a post this morning in LinkedIn about repetition. Like leaders don't realize many times, like the amount of repetition that you need to make
Yep.
on what you want to get done. It's not just one time and show a PowerPoint and it's going to get done. No, you got to just repeat it
That's right.
consistently.
That's right.
All right, so we're flying a plane and we see the landing strip. So we're almost there, and I appreciate like all the things you've said have been pure gold, Julie. I think it's just great contribution. One of the things I haven't got the chance to ask some other guests, but mindset. You're big on managing mindset. You talk about emotion, but
Yep.
how do you manage your own mindset as a leader? Because you have a lot of responsibilities.
Hmm.
Your team one, sometimes it's not so aligned. There is a lot of change above.
Yep.
You work an insane amount of hours. I'm first, you know first
Firsthand
row
knowledge.
seat on
Yes.
how much you work. Yeah.
My husband would
So
not
how do you
disagree
manage your
with you.
mindset?
I
Yeah.
so I think there's a couple things, and at different times in the calendar year I'm better at it. Oftentimes when we're starting the year or a new quarter kicks in, right, is blocking time for either just thinking, right? Like
Yeah.
just let me
Yeah.
process stuff. Let me, and it can be over lunch or it can be out taking a walk or whatever. I think that's super important. The other is exercise, making sure you're taking care of yourself because at the end of the day, it's a job and you want to make sure that you keep in perspective what it is you're trying to accomplish for your life
Right.
and your well-being. And that is also, I have found as a woman leader in particular, it's hard. Other women need role models of women who are balancing a lot of stuff
Right.
and taking time for yourself or telling the team you're taking a vacation or whatever is really important because it doesn't get talked about a lot. And so I think that that's really important, being transparent with people about how you do some self-care and keep your mindset right focused. Those are a couple things, and I think having a network is really important, whether it's peers, right? Like you are for me at Calibra, or having people that you can ping and just check in and be like, hey, I heard this in this meeting. Right? Am I reacting right, wrong? How are you seeing this? Right? Just taking time to check,
Right.
to do some
Right.
gut checks with
Right.
folks, right? At the company, keep your networks from other companies, super important, right? Because sometimes we get super tunnel visioned about where we are and what we're doing, and we forget to look
Absolutely.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Guilty of
yeah.
that. Absolutely.
We
Yeah.
all are. I mean, we're all just going 100
Yeah.
miles an hour, and I think it's important to make those connections and keep those networks alive. So I think those are some of the big things. And then be positive. Having a positive mental attitude is important.
I agree, and all of those are learned skills, right? So picking time to think. I think if you don't put time, and I'm guilty of that, and it's like if you're not putting time to think about current issues or a tough problem, you're doing a disservice to your team,
Yep.
to yourself.
Yep.
Exercise, it goes without saying, but also positive attitude. It just it's a tough one because sometimes you don't have the escape valve to emote, and don't necessarily need to do it in front of your team.
Yep.
You mentioned something as a woman leader, and I want to take a little detour before we land on the last question. But
Okay.
have you had to break through ceilings? And
All the
definitely
time.
you probably have, but how do you experience being a woman in the workplace?
Yep.
Like has it been a problem or an issue?
Not so much over the last 5 years, but
Okay,
the
it's
the
gotten
10
better,
years
you would say.
before that, there were many times, especially as I was building my career as a leader, where I was the only woman in the room. Many
Mm-hmm.
times.
Yeah.
And back to the sports analogy, right? And I know all men do not play sports. I understand that, but oftentimes that is a way to connect. There's a lingo or a language that does connect people sometimes. If you're a musician, you have that. If you right, like there's things that you have to look for to connect with. Mine happens to be sports, but I think
Right.
finding that other way to connect with people, finding commonalities between those the men in the room, whatever it is that works for you, that's your comfort zone, I think is important because it allows people to see you through a different perspective. And so you build a bit of
Right.
rapport like that. I have been in meetings where somebody disagreed with me, a man who was in a role that was probably two clicks more senior than I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the only
Yeah.
woman in the room, and he went after me because he didn't agree with something that I was delivering or doing.
Right.
And
Right. Right.
it was horrifying. That was a horrifying
Yeah.
experience, right? It was not
I
just
can
for
imagine.
me,
Yeah.
for even everybody else around me. I had multiple people come after me afterwards and they were like, well, then stand up, right? In the meeting, don't let it happen. Don't observe. Take an active role. And I think people are learning that more. Like we talk a lot more about bias, and we
Mm-hmm.
see people advocating for other people that are may or may not be like them. And I
Right.
and I see more men, like you're one of them, who are very intentional about opening doors for women in a way, not in the way that, not literally, but more giving space
Yeah.
to allow different. And it's not
Yeah.
just women; it's different, all different kinds of people, right? We all wear multiple things. We're not, none of us are defined by one thing, but I think in general there needs to be more advocates in the room, and I think that's starting to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that answer. I think I know firsthand that you're not a victim, and you approach things, but I can definitely sense that certain times in your life you've felt that discrimination or that pushback.
Yep,
And my message to the audience, particularly men, is you don't have to be perfect. You're going to be intentional. You said
that's
it,
right.
intentional, right? Is the intention. Not everything is going to be a home run. Some people don't like to be, spoken for or supported. They just don't want it, or they take offense with it. But
Right.
just building the space so people feel safe,
Yep.
it's critically important to develop as a leader. So I want to start closing this out. So I want to ask a little bit of a brainy question. You can take a few seconds to think about. But if you look back in your sort of early years, formative
Mm,
years, right, when you're teenager, maybe a little bit later,
mm,
what episode you can think about that informs your leadership style today?
mm,
What happened back then that today you can reference back and say that situation informs my X, my
mm.
resilience, my style, my approach. Do you have one of those?
Yeah, I have a couple. It's funny. I have a very clear, like visual memory of working on something in high school. It was I was in choir, and
Right.
we used to build these big productions, and I showed up to help. I think probably more than everybody else did. I don't know why. I just was interested in it or something. And we were building sets and
Yeah.
sewing costs, like doing all of that. And all of a sudden I got recognition from the teacher and other people, right? And it's not that mine was the best by far, but I was just there. I was participating and I was showing up and I was contributing and asking, how can I help? And that was the first time that I really realized effort is important and just showing up is important sometimes. And so I started to encourage that with other people that I was with or teams I'm on, right? Like if you haven't figured it out, just it's okay. Just show up, right? We'll get
Show
there.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, just show up. That was one that was really, really important. And the other thing was when I was playing soccer in college, I got to my senior year and lo and behold, I wasn't the star player anymore, right? The new kids had come along and they got the
Yeah.
starting job, and I was riding pine and sitting on the bench, and that's a hard transition for people. It's a really
Right.
hard transition, right? And so I really had to take a good look at, well, is this where I want to spend my time? If I'm
Mm-hmm.
not, is it being on the team or is it being on the field during the game? Like what is the more important thing, right? And
Right.
and I really made a decision. I didn't want to be on the team anymore. And that was hard because that's a whole social structure and a whole bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it freed up space for me to work on other things. I got a job,
Right.
I took some different classes. There were different things that I was able to do because I walked away from something. And I think helping people understand that, sometimes if this isn't working, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It might just be this isn't the time right now for that to be done. Let's
Right.
let's cut bait and move on, right? And so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think those two things, like just show up and then make sure you take the time to really change course if you think that that's the right thing to do.
I suspect the second one is playing a big role right
Yeah.
now in your life.
Yeah.
I want to close just by celebrating you a little bit. I have a tremendous respect and admiration for the work you've done. Is one of the things I took from Colibra with me. You're part of my network, but you're also making an impact on everybody around you. It's just incredible. You're deploying very, very high quality leadership. And I know you're a very busy woman, and you gave me this hour and plus for the podcast. So I hope I can honor that by sharing it and getting an audience. But I want to really thank you for your time, and what you've dropped here has been pure gold. I hope
Oh, you're so
we have a
nice.
round two at some point,
Yeah, I'd love to.
and very much appreciate
I'd
it.
love to. I'd love to. I think it's nice to have an opportunity in a forum like this to step back and think about it. Like I said, I tend to be more innate with a lot of what I do, and it's nice to kind of take a step back and think about like, oh, what is it that and how are you intentional about what you do? I think that's important. So thanks for giving me the platform to think about that and talk about it with you. And I'd love to, yeah, come back sometime. I'm looking forward to your program really taking off. This is a great space and
Yeah,
people need it.
yeah. Thank you so much, Julie. I really enjoyed it, and see you next
Yeah,
time.
see you soon. Okay.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this or any other episode of On the Journey podcast, please subscribe, like, or comment in your favorite podcast platform. This episode of On the Journey's idea, writing, recording, and production was created by me, Leo Rodriguez, and it was edited by Martes Multimedia, owned by Ricardo Urdaneta. You can find Martes Multimedia or Ricardo Urdaneta through Upwork.